Doing some damage control today after a leaked email from Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas reveals that there's an internal admission that the border numbers are overwhelming. Let's check in with our own White House correspondent, Emerald Robinson, for the latest out of Washington, D.C. Emerald.
Hi, Bob. Well, we saw the border czar at the National Security Council. Her name is Roberta Jacobson, brief in the briefing room just a short time ago, and she is now the third Biden administration official to refuse to call what we're seeing on the southern border a crisis. Instead, she used flowery language suggesting that it doesn't matter what you call it, it wouldn't change the work that they're doing on fixing a system she says is trying to get better at dealing with the hopes and dreams of these would-be migrants in their home countries. In fact, she said that surges tend to respond to hope, and there's pent-up demand over the last 4 years. But what about the Biden administration strategy, and is there one? Well, Jacobson is saying it's coming down to foreign aid. In fact, the Biden administration earmarked $4 billion for those Central American countries, Guatemala, Honduras, and Guatemala, just a few weeks ago. And now they're saying they're going to put goalposts and certain criteria that must be met to get it in order to deal with the immigration crisis. Here's what Jacobson had to say about that in the briefing room. Listen.
The money is not a tap that gets turned on all at once. You have to make sure that you're continuing to follow those issues. So I think there's a lot of things we learned, and a lot of things we learned about ensuring that funds get to the communities that are really in need, whether it's post-hurricane or coffee rust, which was ravaging Guatemala and Honduras, or, a historic drought.
So Jacobs is saying that they've learned a lot of lessons. What she's referring to, Bob and Heather, is back in 2015 under then Vice President Joe Biden, the U.S. gave $1 billion in foreign aid to these countries. And even those former Obama administration officials, of which Jacobson was one, she was on the Western Hemisphere desk at the State Department at that time, all admit that the U.S. really didn't get much for their money. It went to corrupt officials and it was misused. And if you'll recall, even when the former President Trump in 2019 tried to use foreign aid as leverage in getting these countries to help out with the immigration crisis and the southern border crisis, then he was criticized for doing so. Jacobson also today did talk about all those unaccompanied minors coming to the border. She announced that the Biden administration will restart the CAM program, which is the Central American Migrant Children Program. She did get asked a very pointed question, which she didn't really answer. And the question by the reporter was, given what we're seeing on the border with all these migrant children coming and tripled in the last 3 weeks, why did you not prepare facilities before changing the policy, before saying that they would not be turned away? Jacobson suggesting they couldn't do anything before January 20th, which really didn't get to the heart of the question, was why didn't you delay the change in policy for when you were ready for this influx of migrant children? Now, we've been waiting to hear if Joe Biden was briefed by his officials who went to the border over the weekend. Press Secretary Jen Psaki did say that he was briefed by them today. She didn't give specifics, and she didn't say if or when the president might go to the border himself to see what's going on.
Yeah, and then whether or not he'll go to the border and take questions is a whole nother issue. Emerald,
well,
yeah,
right.
Thank you so much. Well, joining us now to weigh in a little bit more on the crisis at the border is the host of the Howie Carr Show, Howie Carr. So, Howie, I'm not sure how much of Emerald's report you just heard there. There was a whole lot of it. I think perhaps, the thing that stood out the most to me is what the White House was saying today. Amongst the answers that was given was this effort that they said they didn't have time to put into the Central American companies to discourage many of those unaccompanied minors from coming here. Basically trying to say that that's why we're overwhelmed with all of these minors right now.
Right. It seems like the Biden administration, the one plan they had was to stop calling it kids in cages or babies in cages, as the vice president called it when she was running for president. And, I think it's interesting. I did hear the report that the Biden administration now wants to put strings on all the foreign aid that they're giving to these countries where we're being deluged with these illegal migrants coming across the border. Well, wasn't that one of the first things Biden did? Trump had strings attached to aid to Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. They ended that. Now they say they're going to put the strings back on. Am I understanding this correctly? You know, none of this makes any sense. Yeah, there's going to be an address tomorrow by Biden, supposedly about the COVID-19 crisis continuing. He called the governors of Mississippi and Texas Neanderthals for doing away with the mask mandate, and yet he's allowing these illegal aliens to go into the heartland of the United States. When they test COVID positive, they're not even wearing masks. The CEO of Greyhound Buses last week demanded that Homeland Security assure his company that these migrants, these illegals, were COVID-free. There's been no response from the federal government. In Guatemala, the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, is telling Americans don't go down to Guatemala. The risk of infection is so great. Yet Guatemalans come into the United States illegally, no source of income, no visible means of any kind of support except from the federal government, and they're just allowed to go into the country wherever they want. It's insane what's going on.
Here's what I don't get, Howie. You've got this COVID bill passing, so-called COVID, only 9% of it. It's really a spending bill. Then you have them working on H.R. 1, which is a voting bill. Then you're going to have an infrastructure bill. So you have all this planning from Democrats as far as when we get in power, this is what we're going to do. But when it comes to the border, I don't see any concerted explanation as far as, okay, this is how many people we're going to allow in legally to help where they're needed, maybe in the housing industry, in low-paid jobs, including in California or places where I'm sorry, but low-paid jobs picking fruit and that sort of thing that they need in that industry. They don't talk about that. There's no solution.
Right, and there are still millions of Americans who are unemployed, and they're going to have to compete against these illegal aliens, the ones who do decide to join the job market when they come over here. And you know, the illegal aliens are subsidized with welfare, so they're going to be able to work for less money than the unemployed Americans who tend to be members of what the Democrats consider their core constituencies. But the Democrats seem less concerned about Americans than they do about the illegal aliens that are flooding the borders.
Yeah, there's no way that they should have been surprised by this. I mean, they went in immediately with the executive orders and the intention to reverse all of the former president's initiatives at the border, including stopping construction of the border wall, allowing all these folks to come in. But yet now they're acting like they're surprised. Do you think that this ultimately will impact Democrats when it comes to the polls, the election in 2022?
Absolutely. There's only a five-vote margin in the House of Representatives. I think this is going to make it extremely difficult for the Democrats to retain control. You know, there's an old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, the border wasn't broke, and they fixed it, and they broke it, and they own this thing now, and they're being criticized by Democrats down along the Rio Grande, Hispanic Democrats like Representative Henry Cuellar. I mean, this is a fiasco for everybody concerned. And you know, another whole point is they're having these stand downs within the U.S. military to discuss racism and how terrible it is. Well, if racism is so bad in the United States, why is the country being deluged by people from all over the world, most of whom, vast majority of whom are so-called non-white, that want to get into this country if it's so bad? But the Democrats, all they want to talk about is systemic racism and white privilege and wokeness. None of this makes any sense for a sane first world society to be engaging in.
Can we take a quick look? I think they've just passed the bill, the so-called COVID relief bill, which only a small percentage, and it passed right along party lines with one Democrat voting against it. Howie, as we look at this, your thoughts on this so-called COVID relief bill, which only 9% of it's related to that?
It's crazy. I wrote a column today for the Boston Herald. I know a guy who's in jail right now for allegedly trying to steal $438,000 in the COVID, one of the early COVID relief packages, the payroll protection plan, PPP, $438,000. He's in jail now for stealing that money, and he's now under this bill that's just been passed, going to get a $1,400 stimulus check from the government. And there's 159,000 federal prisoners. I guess if you have a Social Security number, every one of those prisoners is going to get a check. There's 2 million plus prisoners in the United States. Are they all going to get checks? Ted Cruz said the other night, the senator from Texas, 12 million illegal aliens may be eligible to get these $1,400 checks. It's just more madness.
Yeah, I think this is another situation where Democrats eventually are going to have to pay for this, because we've spoken a lot about how, if you take a look at the polls, overwhelmingly people supported this bill because all they heard was COVID relief. They didn't hear the truth of the matter, which was the majority of it was not going to COVID relief, and monies that were going to reopening schools were not going to be used until, what, 2022 to 2028 or something crazy like that.
Right.
So I think as people realize what's in it and what they're really paying for, and that they're not really being compensated what they deserve, that's going to come back to haunt the Democrats, as well as the situation at the border.
I think one of the big expenses in this bill, which is kind of a Trojan horse, is that there's, I think, $80 or $90 billion for a bailout of private union pension plans that in declining industries. And so that's a huge tab, obviously, close to $100 billion. But this sets a precedent for bailing out other failing union plans. And those are in the blue states. Illinois is on the verge of bankruptcy now. California and New York not far behind. And that's going to be trillions of dollars to bail out those plans. And now the establishment, the precedent has just been set with this bill, the so-called COVID relief bill. Yeah,
and bailing out cities, bailing out San Francisco, I think. To the tune. So a whole lot in there. Howie, thank you so much for joining us. Great to hear from you, and we'll read your article on it.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, where real news for real people.